Donald Trump. You know the name. Whether we're talking business, media, or politics, he is a figure who has just fundamentally reshaped the American landscape. So today, we're going to dive into the comprehensive Wikipedia biography of his life. We'll use slides pulled straight from that source to really get a handle on his journey.
You know, when you look at the source material, it really paints his public life in three distinct acts. Think about it. A journey from real estate developer to reality TV star, and then, of course, to the presidency of the United States.
Okay, so where does it all start? Well, his business career didn't exactly begin with that small loan he often talked about. According to the source, it was more of a significant head start. We're talking about the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $413 million from his father's empire.
And that business foundation, it was totally transformed into global fame. He created this whole new persona on the reality show, The Apprentice, and that catchphrase, well, it absolutely cemented his image as this decisive, no-nonsense tycoon.
And all that fame? Well, that became the ultimate launchpad for his political career. It's what propelled him to the highest office in the nation. And get this, it eventually made him only the second president in all of U.S. history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms.
All right, so let's dig into that first act. How exactly did he build a brand that would, eventually take him all the way to the White House? Well, it all kicked off when he took the reins of his family's real estate business right in New York City.
So this timeline from the source really lays it all out. You see this rapid rise in Manhattan real estate, but it's also hit with some pretty significant financial challenges. Now, the article is clear. These bankruptcies weren't personal. They were corporate, which let the businesses restructure their debt and keep on operating. But then comes that pivot to media stardom in 2004, and boom, his image is completely remade for millions of people.
Yeah, and this slide, it just perfectly captures the two sides of the coin presented in the source material. On one hand, you've got a brand built on these massive successes, the power of the Trump name. But on the other hand, there's this documented history of corporate bankruptcies and some pretty major legal settlements, connected to things like his foundation and Trump University.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about his move into politics and the really defining moments of his first term. And it all kicked off with what was, let's be honest, one of the most shocking election nights in modern history.
So the 2016 election, wow, what a fascinating picture. The source points out that he actually lost the popular vote, and not by a little, by nearly 2.9 million votes. But as you know, the American system isn't just about the popular vote. He won the presidency and won it decisively in the Electoral College. That made him only the 5th person in all of U.S. history to win the White House while actually losing the popular vote. Pretty incredible. So once he was in office, he enacted a whole slew of signature policies that really reshaped things both at home and abroad. We're talking about the biggest tax overhaul since the 80s, a huge shift in the federal courts, and that very protectionist America First foreign policy. Now, the source also details how his first term was pretty much defined by a whole series of major investigations. First, you had the Mueller report, which found that Russia did interfere to help Trump, but it didn't establish a criminal conspiracy. Then, that was followed by not one but 2 historic impeachments by the House. Of course, he was acquitted by the Senate both times. So his first term wraps up with an election loss to Joe Biden. And according to the source, he just refused to accept that result. He launched dozens of lawsuits, which were all rejected by the courts, and it all culminated in his supporters' attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021.
All right, now let's look at that time between presidencies and his eventual return to power. I mean, this period was just marked by an absolutely unprecedented series of legal challenges for a former, and, as it turns out, future president.
Okay, so this table here, which we've pulled right from the source, just lays it all out. A whole series of major civil and criminal cases he was facing. And the article points out something huge. His conviction on 34 felony counts, that made him the very first U.S. president ever to be convicted of a felony. But here's the thing. Despite all those legal battles, he still mounted a successful campaign. The source documents this truly historic comeback. He gets reelected in 2024, and this time he wins both the popular and the electoral vote against Vice President Kamala Harris. And according to the source, his second term kicked off with just a flurry of executive actions, all aimed at completely reshaping the federal government. We're talking about mass layoffs of civil servants, a super protectionist economic agenda,
and using his presidential power to grant pardons and go after political adversaries. So finally, let's wrap up with this. How does the source actually summarize his political style? And what's the historical assessment of his first term?
Well, the source actually gives a name to the whole movement he created, Trumpism. And it's defined as way more than just a list of policies. It's a really distinctive political style, this form of right-wing populism that, according to the source, dragged ideas from the political fringe right into the mainstream.
Now, this is really interesting. Check out the source's direct characterization of his rhetoric here. It doesn't pull any punches. It flatly states his use of false statements was unprecedented. And get this, it notes that fact-checkers from the Washington Post counted over 30,000 of those claims, just in his first term alone.
And that assessment, well, it directly reflects the consensus among historians and political scientists after his first 4 years. The source documents that multiple academic surveys, we're talking C-SPAN, the American Political Science Association, they all consistently ranked him among the worst presidents in American history, especially in categories like moral authority.
And that brings us to our final thought here. The source documents this really consistent pattern of him challenging and just defying established norms. I mean, in business, in politics, and in the presidency itself. So it kind of leaves us with this big question. What does a career that's completely defined by breaking precedent, what does that suggest for the future of the very institutions he now leads?